Hotform versus MoleGel!
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Hearthstone America's Championship. You can see Hotform and MoleGel on your screen there with the handshake, getting ready for their elimination match. Once again, we're live here from the Folsom Foundry in San Francisco, California, where we have an awesome crowd who, after a 1-hour Control Warrior versus Control Warrior mirror, I'm sure are ready for some smork.
I think that last match was a very intense chess match, but I think we're ready for a little bit more face here. A little more face.
Yeah, of course, I'm joined by Robert A. Wing and Raynad joining us on the desk for this next elimination match. Raynad, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, man. I am excited to see some people play minions with charge, drag them over the opponent's hero portrait, and let go.
Should be fantastic. But the next matchup is going to be Canada versus Brazil. So everybody get on social media and let us know who you are rooting for. You can use hashtag CanWin for Canada or hashtag BRWin for Brazil. Make sure you tweet at PlayHearthstone and let us know your predictions for this next match. All on the line for these players. MoleGel, he just saw his fellow countryman, Correa, take a victory over Trump. So he might be invigorated, but Hotform, he is never without his Canadian spirit.
Yeah, Hotform is a very confident player. We've talked to him a lot over the course of the week. He really did come in here expecting to be the winner. Obviously had a mild setback yesterday. Still totally room for him to advance. MoleGel, by the same token, put up a really respectable performance, played a little bit more aggressively, and Hotform has kind of seemed like he's a little bit unnerved by more aggressive strategies. So it's going to be interesting to see if Hotform can kind of rise to the occasion.
It's great to see that kind of confidence. That's exactly the mentality you need to have if you plan on winning a tournament, and let's see if it pays off.
All right, jumping into game number 1 of this best of 5. Hotform's going to throw out the Warrior, and MoleGel's going to throw out this pretty interesting mid-range hunter. The interesting thing being the Leroy Jenkins that we saw yesterday.
Yeah, we saw, VLPS was playing around the idea, like, this is mid-range hunter, this is mid-range hunter, I know every card in this deck, and then all of a sudden Leroy just comes out, Golden Leroy no less. Time's up, let's do this, and then suddenly 8 damage to the dome, or 6 damage to the dome. I
mean, that's the kind of card that completely swings the math. But now that Hotform is aware that that's in MoleGel's deck, he's going to keep that in mind and, potentially play around it moving forward. So mid-range hunter versus Patron is a matchup that we usually have seen Patron winning in tournament play, but it really can go either way. It's easy for the hunter deck to snowball out of control if the Warrior deck doesn't draw the right early game interaction.
Yeah, we also see the Shredder in MoleGel's opening hand, and based on my experience in this matchup, what's inside that Shredder a lot of the time can be a huge difference maker as far as the mid-range hunter's chances of winning. If it's something small and easily gotten rid of, then a lot of time that really helps the Warrior out. If it's something like a Succubus or something like Millhouse Mana Storm or just something with 3 attack, it can actually just be just enough damage for the Warrior or the Hunter to kind of pound through.
Absolutely. That card could easily represent at least 10 damage, forces your opponent to have the weapon to deal with it. But man, from the Hunter hand, he did not keep the Shredder, and he has double Unleash the Hounds.
Yep.
Now, Patron Warrior is not a deck that's known for playing too many minions until the turn where they win the game. So for most of the game, these Hunters or these Unleash the Hounds are going to be kind of low impact. Still an important card, though. It gets later in the game. The Patron Warrior plays a bunch of Patrons, and then all of a sudden, Unleash the Hounds becomes 5, 6, 7 points of burst damage that can kill the opponent out of nowhere. This is definitely not the stage in the game where you want to draw that card.
Yeah, and even though Knife Juggler Unleash the Hounds is a really great combo against most classes, against Warrior, a lot of times you never get a chance to use it because the biggest board you're going to use it on is like a Patron board, and you don't want those juggles to go into Patrons because they'll just propagate more. You'll find yourself in an even worse position. A lot of times, the Unleash the Hounds card is used as a finisher.
Absolutely. We saw in a Hunter Mirror match yesterday where the player held on to Knife Juggler and Unleash the Hounds, not playing Juggler turn 2 just so he had access to that combo. But here, it's definitely not going to be as important. I think we're just going to see Knife Juggler come out turn 2, unless something like Mad Scientist is drawn. Hotform taking his time turn 1, channeling his inner life coach. Decides to Fiery War Axe Web Spinner.
Yeah, and based on what he had done on that turn, if Loot Hoarder had come out, it might have affected the play. See, Acid Maw come out of the Web Spinner.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it might have affected the play, but now that MoleGel sees that Fiery War Axe out there, it's kind of those things where he doesn't have anything else in his hand to play. Does he feel like he has to just put that out and let the Warrior take 3 damage? Does it affect the play at all? Or is there a world, Raynad, where you would consider possibly just hero power passing here?
I like to see the Juggler played. He just drew Piloted Shredder. He knows that Hotform's going to have a use for that weapon. On turn 4, when he plays Piloted Shredder, it's probably worth throwing it out, but you could hero power and hope to maybe draw something like an Animal Companion the turn after. And it's worth noting, though, Hotform used a coin and the first charge of his Fiery War Axe for a Web Spinner, which replaces itself. And that's a play that might look weird to most players, but the reason he's doing that is because of his Loot Hoarder. Saving coin is important for a combo deck like Patron, but he really needs his Loot Hoarder to stick and kind of use it to control the board, get that extra 2 damage to do more than just trade with a Web Spinner.
I really want to point out that MoleGel, despite, obviously only being 14, by far the youngest player at this tournament, he's not just throwing stuff on the board, he's really thinking out his turns. He did not want to give up that Night Juggler to the Borax and just decided to pass turn after the Hero Power. Unfortunately, this kind of leads into, again, does he play the Night Juggler? Does he unleash the Hounds for 1? There really isn't a great play for him at this point. And, turn 4 is super strong with that, he has 2 Shredders in hands. But, yeah, Knife Juggler, as you can see there, minion, 2 mana, 3/2, one of the strongest, arguably. Throws out a random 1 damage knife for each minion summoned after it is played on the board. So very powerful, very great at getting early board control. Kind of been a staple of Hunter and even Zoo back in the day. Yeah,
just a great minion on its own. And combined with Unleash the Hounds, you can get a lot of juggles very quickly. So MoleGel has his next turn play planned out, and he's trying to prepare the best way that he can for that. He's thinking about Unleash the Hounds into this Loot Hoarder, which looks like a very weak play, and most of the time it is. But in this case, when that Fiery War Axe of Hot Forms kills off the first half of the Shredder, there won't be a Loot Hoarder in play if he makes the Unleash the Hounds play to trade off for the Pilot.
Yeah, and as we talked about earlier, Unleash the Hounds doesn't get much value in this matchup. But I do want to point out one interaction between Acid Maw and Unleash the Hounds. Of course, Acid Maw, whenever a minion takes damage, it's killed. And with Grim Patrons, if you Unleash the Hounds with Acid Maw and you attack into Grim Patrons, they'll actually die before they spawn the next Grim Patron. So you can use that to clear a board full of Patrons later in the game if you can't end it with just the Unleash the Hounds alone.
It's a very heads-up play from Hotform. He's just playing that Frothing Berserker on curve. Normally when we see Patron Warrior, Frothing Berserker is pretty much just held onto the entire game until it is lethal with Warsong Commander. But Hotform recognizes the importance of tempo in this matchup. We've seen him make the play like Coin War Axe and Web Spinner, and he's just going to play that Berserker on curve so that he has something on the table to deal with these Hunter minions coming out of MoleGel.
This is very interesting with the Grim Patron off the top for Hotform there. He's already got the Berserker down. He chose not to swing there, so now it's suddenly less interesting. But had he swung with the Deathbite, it would have left it with 1 charge and the ability to activate Grim Patron. And the Hunter, MoleGel's not really putting anything on the board, and he could have just started pushing tempo really quickly. Loatheb comes down, and Loatheb is a great 5 mana, 5 attack, 5 health creature. Makes enemy spells cost 5 more, and at this point it basically means you don't get to play a spell. Because even a 1 mana spell costs 6, 0 mana costs, Inner Rage.
In this case, Hotform does get to play a spell, and it might be an excellent play, because it would allow him to deal with his Loatheb and keep his Frothing Berserker around while hitting him for 7. So that's a pretty strong swing, and I actually think we're about to see the 5 mana Inner Rage come out and make a pretty great impact on the game for Hotform.
And this is another reason why just playing the Frothing Berserker as a threat or a tempo play against Hunter is a really good play, because you put a threat on the board that forces the Hunter to play defensively. And a lot of times, they don't really have those tools. Kill Command, yeah, they have to have a beast on the board to be able to do the 5 damage to deal with the Frothing Berserker. The Eagle Horn Bow doesn't deal with it. It's hard for them to deal 4 damage without using multiple resources to get there. And of course, Frothing Berserker can end up representing a huge threat if you leave it on the board for too long.
Hotform decides to just trade off Berserker for Loatheb. Still a good trade, 3 mana minion for a 5 mana one. And he's doing that so he can hold on to that Inner Rage in his hand, armor up a bit, save some life, and use that Inner Rage with the Patron in his hand in order to make a lot of dudes.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where unfortunately MoleGel's opening hand hasn't been very conducive to his win condition. He needs to try to get that board early. He needs to try to force Hotform to make 1-for-1 trades with weapons while he's got other minions on the board. And he finally has 2 minions on the board, but at this point, there's a real risk of him just falling behind, because Emperor Thorsan just comes down right there. Obviously, Hotform has a couple of combo pieces, and MoleGel might quickly find himself on the defensive, or possibly waiting for that turn 10 Acid Maw Unleash the Hounds play.
Hotform is actually doing the math on, can I kill my opponent next turn? He has that 4 damage from Death Bites. MoleGel's effectively at 15. He knows using Inner Rage he can make 4 Patrons, which is 12 damage on top of that. So he only needs to deal the extra 3. The Inner Rage deals 2 of that, so he's really 1 damage off lethal next turn.
Yeah, if he picks up a Whirlwind or like second Inner Rage, then all of a sudden he's looking at winning the game next turn.
MoleGel's being really conservative with that Hunter's Mark, wants to hold on to it, maybe use it with Unleash the Hounds the turn after. But he gets to develop a ton of pressure here.
He's actually suddenly just turned the heat up really on Hotform.
Yeah, Hotform does not have lethal. Like, he did not go for the Patrons last turn. He went for the Emperor Thorsan. Does he have the mana to play that Acolyte along with his other minions? No, he doesn't.
No, he doesn't. So if he plays that down and he makes a bunch of patrons, he Unleash the Hounds in the hand.
But no,
MoleGel.
he wins. He wins because of Haunted Creeper. Haunted Creeper came down. This is going to allow Hotform to run his Grim Patrons into the Haunted Creepers. Some Juggles will come out, likely making more Patrons. And this is just a lot of damage. There's going to be a full board of Patrons. Everyone gets in here. And Hotform is going to take the lead in the series.
Yeah, there's maybe one more Knife Juggle come out, kill that Warsong Commander. That could have actually been very big. But
Yeah, those Jugglers actually working against MoleGel in that situation. I think all he needed to do was hit once into the Haunted Creeper anyway to push through, especially with the Inner Age. So really great spot by Hotform.
that said, MoleGel obviously turned this around to where next turn, Hotform didn't have an answer. There's a very real chance that Hotform was just dead.
Absolutely.
All right, and Hotform is going to take game number 1 of the series.
So yeah, he takes a very combo-oriented approach, saves his cards, takes it with that one big turn.
Yeah, and a little bit rough for MoleGel there, getting caught with double Unleash the Hounds in his opening hands. Of course, we talked about it quite a bit, but that's never the spot you want to be in against Patron Warrior because you just don't have much of a use. We saw the best use of Unleash the Hounds there would have been, on turn 3 to kill a Loot Hoarder. You get one Hound and kill a Loot Hoarder. Not a great situation.
That's the risk of the Hunter deck, though. You know, half of it is those high-impact spells, things like Unleash the Hounds, Hunter's Mark, that are so powerful, but only in specific situations and specific matchups. And, I mean, that's a situation where Leroy would have helped, maybe. That's the kind of card that makes your Unleash the Hounds good against anybody.
Yeah, and we had a chance to sit down with Hotform earlier in the week to talk about representing Canada and his upcoming matches.
Let's start with some basic stuff and just tell me how you ended up getting into Hearthstone.
I originally started with Twitch streaming, and that's more of like trying to develop a community where you're making friends and stuff, right? And Hearthstone was really the perfect game that gives you that break between your turns to interact with your friends in the chat and stuff.
So how does your community help you as a player? Do you interact a lot with them? Like, do they bring you energy? Do they bring you strats? Like, what do they do for you?
I mean, every day it's like fun to go to work. I mean, it doesn't even feel like work, right? It's already fun to be playing video games, but with the help of all those people being positive, cheering me on, giving me that kind of energy that I need, even when I'm feeling down, you know, I can know that they'll pick me up and they'll carry me through the day. And that's just such a great feeling to have friends like that you can count on.
How important is innovation to you? Do you like to usually make a deck entirely of your own design?
Oh yeah, I'm really huge on innovation. I think something like a card game, it has so much potential to experiment with this creativity because of that almost infinite nature of the probabilities at play that I really like innovating and I like seeing those new strategies come forward. So I hope that I can do more of that in the future.
What is important about innovation? Why you like to innovate as opposed to follow?
To me, when you come into a tournament like this, there's a lot of pressure where kind of your reputation is on the line with the decks you pick. Because in a card game, you know, the decks you're bringing, where I'm assuming that all the other guys, they're not going to make a mistake. They're going to play their decks perfectly. But I think there's a huge amount of innovation in Hearthstone that's possible where you can experiment with these outrageous decks that actually can be quite successful. They're much more interesting to watch than when you're just playing the standard stuff. But you are putting your reputation on the line, so it might take 1,000 games for you to test a deck out and see that it's perfect. And it's tough to bring it to a tournament when you haven't been maybe proven completely as a player. I don't think I've proven myself completely as a player yet. So I'm kind of waiting for that opportunity for later when I can show some of that innovation and bring it to the scene so that I can mix it up and kind of entertain the audience a little more.
When you find out who your opponent's going to be, especially in a match that's pretty big and important as this one, what do you do immediately after finding that out?
I don't know. At this point, I already have studied all of the opponents, and I think I'm pretty prepared to face any of them, but I also recognize that all of them are capable of taking me down. You know, every one of the guys here with me are strong players, strong competitors, and I don't think that I'm going to have an easy road no matter who it is, so I'm kind of prepared no matter what.
So it seems like you're more of a challenge seeker than someone looking for conquest.
Yeah.
What does BlizzCon represent to you then?
BlizzCon is representing, I guess, the ultimate chance to show that I'm capable of playing to perfection. I already think that I can play to perfection, but I hope that it'll be showcased to others so I can have that reputation and then I can use that to be more creative in the future.
Do you feel like you have the weight of Canada on your shoulders going into this tournament?
Not at all. I have the wings of Canada lifting me up while I'm going through the tournament. The positive support behind me just makes me feel better every day.
A real force for positivity in the community from Hotform. Really great to see that kind of attitude moving into the Americas Championship. We're back. We're about to jump into game number 2 of this elimination match between MoleGel and Hotform. Once again, joined by Robert A. Wing and Rayned. With Patron Warrior out of the way, does that give Hotform a pretty smooth path for this victory?
I mean, that's a deck that's very strong. Everyone's aware it's strong. It's a deck that Hotform brought for a very good reason. He expected to get that win with it. He got a matchup that's slightly in his favor, and it went the way that he wanted it to. But it's definitely not over yet. We've seen he has a slight lead, but MoleGel can easily mount a comeback, take this match. It's still anyone's game.
So Hotform is going to throw out the Druid the second time around. MoleGel is going to switch it up. He is going to go over to that mid-range Paladin.
Yeah, mid-range Paladin versus Druid is a dynamic that's kind of changed over the expansion. There was a long time where Paladin was really kind of weak to Druid just because, again, you can only get up to 30 HP, combo comes out, and if you're not putting enough pressure on the board, then, you know, the Druid can just kind of run you over. GVG comes out, Shielded Minibot comes out, Muster for battle. It allows the Paladin to actually assert itself more. And I actually think Paladin, this seems to me like a pretty even matchup, basically. Assuming, of course, that we don't see something like a Innervate coin into Emperor Thorstein, which can just break the game wide open. But if the Paladin is allowed to just steadily build up the board, then they usually have a pretty good shot at beating the Druid.
Yeah, it's definitely a matchup that with a lot of back and forth can definitely go either way. And both players right now are trying to decide what cards to keep. Definitely a tough decision for Hotform. A card like Swipe is so important in the matchup because it's one of your only good answers for something like Muster for battle. But on the other hand, he can't exactly keep a 6 and a 7 mana card in his opener. He's going to hold on to that Swipe. He got the Wild Growth. That's actually huge.
Has Dalaran Aspirant affected this matchup at all after TGT was released? Because a lot of players tended to think that that would help a lot of matchups that Druids tended to struggle with in the past.
Darnassus Aspirant is definitely one of the strongest 2-mana cards in the game, and it definitely made the Druid deck better. But the Paladin deck still has access to Shielded Minibot, with the help of Muster for battle, you can actually kill Darnassus Aspirant pretty quickly. And you also have Knife Juggler, which trades for it 1-for-1. So the card definitely helped, but Paladin has the answers to deal with it, and it really depends on which order the cards are exactly drawn in, who has the coin, a lot of factors.
Yeah, we obviously we've seen a lot of Secret Paladin on the ladder lately, but people have been bringing Paladin to this tournament, have been bringing more of that old-style mid-range Paladin, which again is all about building up the board with cards like Knife Juggler and the Muster for battle, like Shielded Minibot, even Murloc Knight, which is new to the Grand Tournament, to just kind of build these big oppressive boards that are just difficult to deal with. And I think it's very interesting that we're not seeing more Secret Paladin.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a deck that is a powerful force on ladder, very popular. The best players in the Americas have opted to play the more standard control Paladin that we used to see a lot of. And this is a deck that I believe a lot of the Brazilian players played in the qualifiers leading up to this event. And with really good success, the deck has overperformed people's expectations.
Yeah, even though Secret Paladin is a fantastic deck, a lot of people say it's one of the strongest, at least on ladder, it still hasn't really been refined. There's a lot of different versions of it, and coming into a big stakes tournament like this, I think a lot of players are just not willing to take the risk of bringing a deck that, you know, might be a liability because of how unrefined it actually is.
I think there's also a little bit of a stigma attached to it because of how it performed in the North American qualifier tournament. Phone Tap had at least one game where he just, you know, blew the door off with it and proceeded to run over Muzzy, but otherwise, the deck was very inconsistent. A lot of people just aren't convinced on it, and mid-range Paladin, a deck especially like this, is one of those decks that people just feel more comfortable with. The performance is less erratic. You don't have to worry about just drawing into all Paladin secrets early on. We do see that Swipe come out from Hotform, and Hotform's hand is really, really good, basically because he got that Wild Growth, and he's been able to get to those big cards. Obviously, he has Druid of the Claw. He's Keeper of the Grove if he wants to use to take out the Knife Juggler, but Hotform's in a pretty solid spot, and honestly, so is MoleGel. He's just got a bunch of high-performance threats.
Yeah, we see that Swipe come down and just obliterated that board, and that's because of a very small decision that we saw come out of MoleGel. He coined that turn 1 mini-bot, but turn 2, he chose not to play Knife Juggler and just Hero Powered instead. And he did that to play around the turn 3 Keeper of the Grove from Hotform that he had access to thanks to Wild Growth. But Hotform at the time didn't actually have the Keeper of the Grove, so playing around that card from MoleGel actually made that Swipe a lot more effective against him.
Yeah, the Keeper of the Grove coming out on the Druid turn 4, normal turn 3 is something you're very much afraid of as the Paladin player because Knife Juggler is such an important card. Getting those knife juggles off something like Muster for Battle, even adding an additional hero power, allows you to assert a lot of control over the board and possibly get it back to your end. And right now we see Hotform is in a spot where he's got a 4/2 shade that's just continuing to grow each turn. He's got that Keeper of the Grove down with 4 health, and he doesn't have to worry about necessarily Consecration. Consecration isn't an issue for him right now. True Silver Champion would only take out the Keeper of the Grove. It wouldn't take out the Shade. So his board is actually so diverse right now in stat lines that there is no one answer that MoleGel can have. And MoleGel just opts to play his own threat at this point.
Yeah, and that threat being Spectral Knight, a card that we haven't seen in quite a while, of course, from the Nax Rammus set. A lot of times, Druids actually played this card because it made their matchup better against Warrior. But Raynette, how does this do against a Druid deck? They do have spells, but is it going to be able to contest big boards?
Well, Druid deck doesn't have the best removal, so Spectral Knight isn't exactly dodging a lot in that regard, but Druid does have very strong minions. So this is a card that's a lot stronger against classes like Rogue, Warrior, like you mentioned. Not that good against Druid. It is still a reasonably statted minion, but the ability of dodging spells, things like Swipe and Wrath, most of the time doesn't matter too much. In this case, though, we know Hotform does have both those cards in hand, so it actually is more effective than it usually is against Druid.
So even with these minions being cleared, Dr. Boom being silenced basically means the Savage Roar won't be lethal, I don't believe. Let's see, Savage Roar and Druid of the Claw might be lethal. Yeah, it looks like he's going for it, so Hotform spots it.
It's, it's 10 plus 8, so that'll do.
Looks like it.
Hotform jumps out to 2-0 lead.
That's crazy. That was a very quick game, ended on turn 7. Of course, we have to factor in the ramp, so Hotform, I mean, he's putting himself on the board. He only is 1 game away from securing his spots in the decider match later. Of course, this is the loser's bracket elimination match, so MoleGel now down 2-0. He's going to have to fight back if he wants to stay alive in this tournament.
Now, Hotform just playing 2 of the strongest decks in the metagame right now, playing it with confidence, and yeah, just jumps out to a huge lead early off the back of some solid draws and good play.
And this is very important for Hotform. Hotform seemed a little bit shaken up after yesterday's match where, he did lose because, again, he came into this expecting to win. He expected to be the America's Championship, but to take a loss right after you talk about how confident you are in some of these interviews can be very jarring. So for him to get these 2 wins right out of the gate, I think it's very good for him. For MoleGel, I mean, if you look at his lineup, the remainder of his lineup is very aggressive aside from the Paladin deck. Yeah. There's always chances he could just very easily climb back into this, especially with Hotform's final deck being Mage, a deck which we've seen, Jab playing a lot over the course of this weekend. Can be a little bit inconsistent. It doesn't necessarily always just do exactly what you want it to do.
Yeah, and Hotform, some of that confidence comes from, having Canada at his back.
Well, what are all the things that you do to play up the Canadianness of your stream? You have the emotes, the moose. Like, tell me every Canadian detail of your stream.
Man, you got me on the spot for that one. I'm gonna miss something. I try to like not bad manner any of my opponents. I mean, like I said, it's really about positivity, and just trying to bring a feel-good moment whenever I can, and avoiding that kind of negativity that can be involved when you're playing video games and maybe you get frustrated about a loss or something. I really try hard to never take it out on anyone, and I try to let people know that like you can be successful without ever having to be rude to someone. That's not part of the program. You can be a completely nice person and still do well, and I think that communicates nicely on Twitch when there are a lot of communities that don't try to promote that attitude.
Yeah, really cool to see, once again, Hotform promoting positivity, and a lot of that comes from Canada, being Canadian, being polite and apologetic, but he's definitely not going to be apologetic in this match because he is up 2-0 and has 1 more game to win to secure his spot in that decider match for that group.
I was going to say, Hotform comes from the mean streets of Canada, but it's not really mean streets. They're nice streets. The nice streets of Toronto, Canada.
Yeah, he's going to try and pick up his last win of this Tempo Mage really quick. Go out for nice victory coffee at Tim Hortons and
maybe get some
enjoy the rest of his day.
With some maple syrup and Canadian bacon and just really have a celebration if he can close out the series. MoleGel obviously does not want to let him after seeing Correa win his match. There's a lot of pride on the line. Obviously, both players from Brazil are very interested in kind of putting Brazil on the map as competitive Hearthstone goes. So MoleGel opts to keep going with the Paladin against what he knows to be Hotform's Mage. And Hotform's Mage is just kind of that standard tempo Mage. From what I remember, it's not necessarily as a variant, as much of a variant Mage as Jab's running. Yep. So you see stuff like Water Elemental, which is very solid against weapons, great against Paladins, great against Patrons, usually pretty solid against Hunters. Gonna have to imagine this lines up pretty well with MoleGel's mid-range Paladin.
This has sort of become Hotform's signature deck. He was one of the only players to run Temple Mage in the North American Qualifier Tournament, and one of the cards that he did run was Nexus Champion Sarad. So that's a card that can provide you, similar to Spellslinger, with quite a bit of tempo in matches, and I mean, that's sort of the name of the deck, so that's really a tool that is going to be of good use for Hotform.
Yeah, actually, I was talking to Hotform quite recently about Mage decks, and I told him what was in mind that I've been playing on ladder, and he just stared at me. He's like, "You don't have Nexus Champ Sarad?" And I was like, "No, you know, I find him a little bit slow for what I'm trying to do." And he's like, "You need Nexus Champ Sarad." He's very insistent on this card, hoping. Oh, and then we see it. We actually see it in Hotform's hand. So there's a very real world where we see that come out on turn 5, or he could choose to save it later for turn 7 to kind of get guaranteed value.
We'll see how it does for him. So Temple Mage, the deck that's going to try to use a lot of its resources early in the game to get a board lead and then take over the game with those late game threats like Dr. Boom, like Nexus Champion Sarad, Ragnaros. This curve is about as good as you can ask for. The coin Mana Worm opening is so powerful in a deck like Temple Mage because the coin doesn't just allow you to dictate how your curve in the early turns goes. It has synergy with things like Flame Waker, which would destroy a board full of, well, 1/1s, like Muster for Battle might make.
That said, MoleGel's opening hand is pretty solid as well. Double shielded minibot, now Knife Juggler, has Muster for Battle, has the equality if things get too dicey, and can go right in that turn 4 Defender of Argus if he's got minions on the board. So both players have actually drawn extremely well for this opening, which is going to make it very exciting to see who ultimately comes out with board control. Muster for Battle, obviously great because it equips that 1/4 Light's Grace and allows you to deal 1 damage per turn to something like this Mana Worm, and yeah, now he's suddenly got the board.
MoleGel had so many options on this turn 3. Muster for Battle is the play that uses all of his mana, so it's the most intuitive play, but he could have saved it for Knife Juggler turn 5 to go with that Battle Cry synergy. And he actually had a decision on what to trade with. He decides to leave the Mad Scientist up, let Hotform make that trade, get a secret up, and now that secret is going to dictate like the order he plays his minions in this turn. Do you just drop Defender, trade into the potential Defender that you give Hotform? Do you play Knife Juggler first and then Minibot after? There's a lot of decisions here that aren't exactly easy to identify the best play.
Yeah, Defender of Argus is one of the best cards to throw into Pure Entity, especially with the Water Elemental on the board. You kind of want to protect your minions in a way because now Hotform's going to have the opportunity to continuously freeze MoleGel because he's not able to deal with it pretty much no matter how those juggles lie. But he's thinking that he's going to put big enough threats on the board like Knife Juggler to disincentivize Hotform from attacking face and freezing for the weapon.
Absolutely. He decided to develop his board this turn rather than playing Equality, which means that Water Elemental can begin freezing him, which is going to mean that True Silver Champion that MoleGel just drew is going to be not too effective for the next couple turns.
I'm very curious to see if there is a scenario where MoleGel actually just brings out the equality with the 1/1s on the board just to get rid of that Water Elemental so he can start using the True Silver Champion. Because the rest of his hand, Defender of Argus, is an okay play. I mean, it's not necessarily what you want to be doing at this point in the game. And that True Silver Champion is just completely useless for him right now.
It is a huge deal to be frozen like that, especially with classes like Rogue. It makes their hero power useless. Warriors, a lot of their early game removal are weapons, and MoleGel, I mean, Paladins don't suffer from it as much as those other two, but with this draw early on for MoleGel, you know, Muster for Battle early, into True Silver Champion, now he might have to expend those precious resources, that equality, to take out this Water Elemental, and I think Hotform would be happy to see something like that.
Yeah, especially with Nexus Champ Sarad in hand, obviously Archmage Antonidas in this game. Like, Archmage Antonidas is actually extremely difficult for Paladin to remove. They basically have to have something on the board to deal with it if they don't have the equality, so...
Or Nexus Champion Sarad, 5 health can be a little bit awkward for Paladins to deal with as well.
Absolutely. It's a new card from the Grand Tournament. 5 mana, 4/5, decent stat line. Inspire, add a random spell to your hand. So most of the time you see this card played, it is going to be on turn 7 or later, a turn where you want to weave in a hero power anyway to take out a minion and get an extra spell, which gives you the potential to win games you have no business winning. Maybe your opponent has Jiraxis and you get a Sacrificial Pact. Maybe you get a healing spell. I've seen all sorts of crazy stuff happen, and I know that Hotform knows the percentages on what he can get off of it.
It also synergizes well with the rest of the deck. It's one of the reasons why it's put into Temple Mages, because you have cards like Sorcerer's Apprentice and Flame Waker in order to, you know, make spells cheaper, and also Flame Waker, of course, every time you cast a spell, you deal 2 damage, randomly split among all enemies. So adding spells to your deck, making your deck more than 30 cards by adding a random spell to your hand, can make the deck really powerful.
Yeah, I'm actually curious. So I've played a lot of Nexus Champs Rob, but I've actually played in Druid, oddly enough. The craziest card I've ever gotten is Pyroblast out of it as a Druid. So as a Druid, just gets to do 10 damage to kill someone. Have you guys played much Nexus Champs Rob at all?
Yeah, I play, well, I was trying out this list from Hotform, and Next Champ Sarad actually hasn't treated me very well, I would say. I get Totemic Might more times than I care to admit.
We see Hotform chooses a line of play where he plays down the Sorcerer's Apprentice and then goes ahead and plays the Secret. Opts not to use the Flame Cannon, and obviously with that Flame Waker in hand, that might have been something that came into consideration. He wants to be able to get maximum value off of that Flame Waker, and this board right now isn't necessarily too intimidating, and assuming a weapon doesn't come out, or Consecration, Sorcerer's Apprentice would trade into one of these minions, so maybe thinks the board isn't too out of control.
It's a very key turn to develop a Mirror Entity. It's going to stop MoleGel from just slamming this Justicar Trueheart, a card that really can just take over any long game from the Paladin deck. And one of the new late game tools that has access to. He's going to take the risk, knowing that if that is Mirror Entity, he has to trade his 3/3 into it.
And that's not the end of the world. To be able to trade that into a Justicar Trueheart is great.
It's a completely fine play. He knows that lots of Temple Mages do play things like Counterspell, Effigy. There was no guarantee that that was Mirror Entity.
At the same time, Flame Waker and keeping the Flame Cannon is going to turn out to be very big for Hotform. Allows him to very easily get that 6/3 off the board. Opts to Unstable Portal first, see what he gets.
Young Priestess.
The Young Priestess, not necessarily what you want to see here. Yeah, so he's thinking of just Flame Cannoning. But you see it on his face, he needed more than a Young Priestess out of that portal, and now he's in a kind of a spot where the Paladin's just going to begin flooding the board with these 1/1 Silver Covenant tokens. So
you can see how protective Hotform has been of that Flame Waker this game. He opted not to play it on turn 5, instead going for the Mirror Entity Sorcerer's Apprentice. He doesn't have spells in hand, but he really wants to use that Flame Waker after there's a stream of 1/1s to deal with. Thanks to Justicar Trueheart, that should be just about every turn starting now.
Yeah, but Hotform is starting to run out of resources, and in a battle where both decks are running out of resources, that's when Justicar Trueheart sort of really shines, especially in Paladin, because that hero power ends up going a long way. Wow!
Holy Wrath is one of those cards that doesn't see a lot of play from the original Hearthstone set. Holy Wrath draws a card, so you just get a card, and whatever the mana cost is, that's how much damage it deals to the target, and it can be an enemy hero, it can be a minion. So depending upon the next card, if it's like Archmage Antonidas, maybe Dr. Boom, that could be a lot of damage.
Yeah, one of the most fun interactions with Holy Wrath is when you play it with Molten Giants in your deck, because Molten Giants actually cost 20 before you get them reduced by health. So when they come out of your deck, they deal 20 damage with Holy Wrath. Now, we can safely say that Hotform does not have any Molten Giants tucked away in his Temple Mage deck, but it's a cool card nonetheless.
Unfortunately, Hotform is probably not playing around that Holy Wrath off the Nexus Champ Sarad Molten Giant synergy.
That's the beauty of cards like that generate anything from the game. Things like Unstable Portal. It really is impossible to anticipate what came out of it.
Unfortunately, we see here Holy Wrath, it's a great resource to have. It is a spell. Okay, that's a way better draw to use a Flame Waker if he chooses to. But again, with how fast these minions or how fast these 1/1 tokens are being made, it's really one of these things where Hotform understands that the second he gets rid of them all, there's just more coming back.
And there's a True Silver Champion equipped, so if he throws out his Flame Waker here, which is one of the tools that he could use to, put pressure on the board, then it's just going to get killed, and that's a lot of the momentum that he has moving forward is going to be with that card.
The second Flame Waker, that makes things interesting.
That is going to be such a high-impact play. Oh, the boom coming out, though, from MoleGel. That's a lot better than playing Lay on Hands this turn. He gets to establish control of the board, one of the strongest minions in the game for turn 7, and that hero power generating 2 tokens. Flame Wakers are good, but they're not going to deal with that 7/7 threat coming out of MoleGel.
Now that said, we saw yesterday there was a trend where if you played Dr. Boom, your opponent immediately drew Big Game Hunter. I don't think Hotform is playing Big Game Hunter in his Tempo Mage deck. So does he just get one added to his deck? I'm not sure if that's written on the card or not.
No, not quite. Mr. Boom has indeed been promoted back to Dr. Boom today.
I was going to say, he's no longer have to be incognito, hiding from Big Game Hunting. We're going to see a lot of missiles from multiple sources being thrown out here.
Yeah, but it's just not going to be enough to deal with this entire board. Dr. Boom most likely going to survive. Well,
oh no, Flame Waker down.
That's not what you want to see if you're Hotform.
No, and unfortunately, the Flame Waker Arcade Missile gimmick is really fun when you have a lot of 2 HP minions on the board, and you can get all kinds of value off of that. But when you have a 7/7 on the board, there's basically, in addition to having a bunch of other tokens, there's just kind of no universe where Dr. Boom is actually going to go down to the Arcane Missiles or the Flame Wing.
And now, Hotform's just out of resources. He does draw into the Archmage Antonidas, which can give him a lot of room to put some burn in his hand and get some fireballs, but he doesn't have any spells to combo with it. That's one of the sacrifices you make.
Ooh.
Whoa.
These 1/1s are about to have 2 arms, man. 2
Yes.
arms. And wow, after he hero powers, it's gonna be quite the board. And Hotform drew Flame Strike, and the crowd was like, "Oh, it's Flame Strike," and you kind of realize, like, wait, he's just gonna make more dudes. Like, there's an endless dude conveyor belt here for MoleGel, and unfortunately, as you said, Hotform's kind of out of resources.
That's the power of a card like Justicar Trueheart. It really does lock up any game that MoleGel can drag out into the late stages. And that is kind of how Tempo Mage operates. If you don't get that early lead and you don't snowball, most slower decks will be able to take over in late stages of the game. And MoleGel is in no danger of dying to something like fireballs off the top, killing him from a winning board position. So at this point, Hotform is kind of treading water. You can slow the game down with things like Flame Strike, but in the end, the endless stream of 1/1s, like you said, is going to dominate the game.
Or even opts to trade out with that injured Dr. Boom, which is very heads-up play, playing around Flame Strike. Flame Strike does come out, and again, Hotform has cleared the board, and for about 15 seconds, nothing will be on MoleGel's board.
Yeah, Archmage Antonidas does get a spell for Hotform for the following turn with Frostbolt to be able to start, generating those fireballs. But you can see MoleGel just has so many resources to deal with it. He's got Iron Begal. He also has double equality. So if he wants to kill it or silence it, leave it on the board, he's got every single tool at his disposal.
And for right now, for MoleGel, understanding that Flame Strike has come out, there's kind of no universe where Hotform would be running to, and MoleGel probably knows Hotform's deck lists by now, so he can just start with impunity, just playing down stuff like Shredder, playing down these kind of mid-range minions that are going to help seal the game out for him. The Archmage does make an appearance, but Hotform doesn't have any other spells in hand, so it's just kind of the one Frostbolt will come out, he'll get an Aha, he'll get a Fireball.
I mean, that's the issue with cards like Archmage Antonidas in a tempo deck. You use your spells that you draw in the early game to take control of the early game, and by the time you're playing your 7-mana minions, a deck like Tempo Mage oftentimes won't have a lot of cards in hand. If you're not playing things like Mechanical Yeti, it is hard to generate that endless stream of fireballs a lot of the time.
I don't believe MoleGel has... No, actually, you know what? With the Quartermaster, he is going down 3-4.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that is going to do it.
MoleGel is going to win a game and take this series to 2-1, so he is staying in it, and Hotform is going to have to find a win with his Mage deck if he wants to close out the series.
Yeah, MoleGel bringing it back. Drew a lot of his best early game interaction to take control of the board, and both players had a fantastic early draw. It's cool to see this mid-range Paladin deck that a lot of players kind of underestimated, representing Brazil very well. They played it in the qualifiers leading up to this. They're bringing it here in the top 8 and winning with it.
Yeah, and despite MoleGel winning that matchup, he didn't really look relieved. It's just one more step that he has to get through to make it to, that game 5. He's still got to win one more match just to keep the series going. Hotform is still one game away from moving on to that elimination match.
Yeah, as I kind of said yesterday, going down 0-2 really kind of puts you in a mental space where there isn't a lot of relief even when you do win that first game. It's you got to start clawing back into it. You don't really let yourself celebrate. You just want to keep going and finding ways to actually just close out the series because he's still got to get through this Mage deck at some point.
All right, right into game number 4. This is going to be Hotform with Tempo Mage and MoleGel with Mech Mage. Now, we have to keep in mind MoleGel, he's got a little bit of a different kind of Mech Mage than some of you might be used to seeing. It's a little bit slower. It does run card draw like Arcane Intellect, which, a lot of people don't run in Mech Mage. Renee, what kind of benefits do you think MoleGel is going for by running slower cards like Flame Strike and Arcane Intellect in a faster deck like Mech Mage?
Well, most faster decks like Mech Mage, you end up dumping most of your cards on the table early and forcing your opponent to deal with it or lose the game in a very short window. But control decks that can slow the game down oftentimes will just have better draws than you. You'll run out of resources, things to play. But cards like Arcane Intellect help counteract that. MoleGel's early game hands won't be as explosive because of cards like that being in his deck on average, but going into a late game, he's going to have much more resources to work with, more draws at cards like Fireball to take the game. And I definitely like the innovation. It's definitely a cool twist on the deck that we've seen for a long time, but not even recently in tournament play. I'm just happy to see things that aren't Freeze Mage, to be honest, being played. These are two Mage decks that are kind of in the new meta of Hearthstone since the Grand Tourney came out.
Yeah, MoleGel now has the option on turn 1 to just go ahead and play out that Mech Warper and then play down the Clockwork Gnome with it as well, but likes to keep the coin. You know, obviously he has some 5-drops in hand he might want to get to on that turn 4. Again, because he has these cards that are not mechs, the density of mech cards, you know, is lower. It's going to be more difficult for him to kind of, as Reynad pointed out, have that explosive early game with just like Noyatrons, just right out of the gate with Clockwork Gnomes, more Mech Warpers, Spider Tanks, and Hotform just going to use the hero power, get rid of it, not think too much of it.
So both of these Mage decks can have explosive draws, take control of the board early, but in the situation with both these aggressive decks, one player is going to be the one playing defensively and trying to drag the game out into the late game, and that's going to be Hotform. You see him, rather than developing a Scientist, like maybe in a Mech Mirror Mage that would have happened, you see him hero powering. He's going to be trying to remove the minions from the Mech Mage deck, and the reason that he has to play defensively is because the Mech Mage deck is the more explosive one. It's the deck that can capitalize on a board lead better with cards like Goblin Blast Mage, Tinkertown Technician, and Hotform's going to do everything he can to stop that.
Yeah, he's got a really solid hand. He got that Mana Worm off the top last turn, allowed him to Frostbolt, get rid of the Mech Warper, and now he has the Mirror Entity as well as the Mirror Images.
Yeah, and I also want to point out a scenario that we could have seen this turn if MoleGel hadn't drawn into 2-drops is Reynad pointed out, instead of going with the turn 1 coin Mech Warper Clockwork Gnome, which is the most explosive play, MoleGel knew that going into turn 4, he might need to coin out something like an Azure Drake or a Lothep. So holding on to that coin would end up being a bigger resource than getting that explosive start early on. So he does draw into 2-drops, so it doesn't. It's not really relevant right now, but say he had drawn into late game threats, then being able to coin out Azure Drake or Lothep could have been game changing.
We see Hotform ends up for his trouble getting an Noyatron into his Mirror Entity, which is, again, it's another wall. It prevents the Mech Warper from just, going face, and he actually feels there's enough protection on the board to just play down that Nexus Champ Sarad on turn 5, and he's going to probably get a lot of value out of that, assuming, of course, a Fireball doesn't come out.
I mean, that's some of the flexibility of a mechanic like Inspire. Yes, most of the time, Nexus Champion Sarad will be played turn 7 to guarantee value, but in this case, you can just play it on curve.
We see here MoleGel is actually considering letting the Nexus Champ Sarad survive.
Yeah, that would be
a
very
bold move.
Interesting. Yeah.
That'd be interesting to see what his play is here. If he does, the problem here is if he fireballs, he's on 1 mana, unless he uses the coin. He doesn't really have anything organic to do, so yeah, I think we're going to see what Nexus Champ Sarad gives to Hotform.
Yeah, Nexus Champion Sarad can actually be a huge threat if you leave it alive for a turn. The spell that you can get can sometimes be not that impactful, but it can sometimes be game-changing. So we'll see what he's going to pull out this turn.
And Nexus Champ Sarad just Siphon
Soul. Wow.
That's not bad.
No, especially with the Archmage Antonidas sitting in the hands of MoleGel.
That could end up being huge.
More importantly, again, unless a Fireball comes out here, you might see a second spell generated off Nexus Champ Sarad.
This game is definitely going in the direction that Hotform wants it. He still has 30 life to play with. The Mech Mage deck didn't get out of control early, and even if Archmage Antonidas generates 1 or 2 Fireballs, it's not enough to kill Hotform from his safe life total.
You would usually probably want to have the opponent down to somewhere around like sub 20 health, and then start looking to get those Fireballs off Archmage Antonidas. But all right, so we do see the Fireball is going to come out. MoleGel's had enough of that, and so Hotform got a Siphon Soul, which is still great. That's a great spell to get off of Nexus Champ Sarad, as opposed to something like Deadly Poison or Sacrificial Pact.
Absolutely. That Mana Orb can go with it, add 1 more minion to his board if he wants to play Siphon this turn. Hotform's aware that MoleGel plays cards like Dr. Boom, cards like Archmage Antonidas in his deck, so he might want to save that Siphon. But on the other hand, it is pretty tempting to just use it now immediately, get control of the board. Arcane Intellect isn't guaranteed to do that for you. It's not going to draw into something like a Frostbolt most of the time.
All right, so he goes ahead and trades up the Mad Scientist.
Yeah, heads up play, doing that before drawing cards to reduce the chances of drawing one of the secrets that Scientists can get out.
Draws into double Fireball with that
good.
Arcane Intellect.
That's pretty good.
I'd say, at this
the same
stage,
time,
not
he has
really.
no minions, actually, so it's good to have those resources in hand for when you want to close out the game, but those are kind of things you would want to have later when it's kind of crazy. We're looking at this. Tempo Mage versus Mech Mage. We're on turn 6 and 7, respectively. Both mages are at 30 health.
Yeah, so Hotform has that 3 mana to work with. He's going to play Arcane Missiles, looking to hero power.
Yep.
Gets some great hits. Leaves a mech alive, though, so something like Goblin Blast Mage could come out.
Hotform got the Arcane Missiles off, actually sunk MoleGel's Lothep, so that's That's real problematic for MoleGel. Oh,
Most of the time, you're not too happy to draw a 1-mana card on turn 7, but when your opponent has a secret as Tempo Mage, it's pretty nice to give him a 1-2. Lets him develop Drake pretty safely, take out that Cogmaster because Hotform does not have a mech.
Yeah. Ray and I talked about last match how Tempo Mage, Archmage Antonitis can sometimes be tough to use since you're using your spells early on as, you know, Tempo plays. Mech Mage has a lot easier of a time. With cards like Clockwork Gnome and Integra Talent Technician, you get those 1-mana spare parts that, you know, you can hold on to if you know that you have Archmage Antonitis in your hand to basically turn them into guaranteed fireballs if you can get them out on like turn 9, turn 8, or turn 9.
Right. MoleGel taunts up the Cogmaster, but because that Snow Chugger was on 1 health, Hotform gets to take out MoleGel's only mech, kill the Cogmaster for free, and now MoleGel's in a tough spot. He has to throw out this Antonitis and just hope that Hotform doesn't have something like a Fireball to deal with it.
Or a Siphon Soul.
Or a Siphon Soul. Should have played around it.
I mean, why don't you play around the Siphon Soul if you're MoleGel?
He has to be pretty scared. He saw Nexus Champ Sarad draw a spell, and he's seen that spell sit in Hotform's hand the whole game. So,
we're not even going to see it. We're just going to see a Fireball come out.
That is such a great draw from Hotform. And Azure Drake, allowing him to use that Fireball instead of the Siphon Soul, get a clean kill.
Well, off the top, a Dr. Boom from MoleGel, so that's going to help him fight back. But I don't know. This is looking pretty rough for MoleGel. Hotform has to be really happy about that Siphon Soul in this situation.
I think we're going to see Hotform take out that Snow Chugger and then play Flame Waker, siphon the 7/7, and try to take out those Boom Bots.
Those Boom Bots, depending on how much they hit for, could very much change the face of this game. If they're the weak sort of Boom Bots that don't kill Azure Drakes, which is not most Boom Bots, because Boom Bots love to kill Azure Drakes, then MoleGel could basically be in a really tough spot.
Yeah, well, MoleGel is in a tough spot regardless, I think. Once Dr. Boom is dealt with, what does he have? He has double Fireball, but Hotform's at 30 health. Even if he wasn't at 30 health, he'd be 3 health higher.
MoleGel's face says it all there. He just puts his head in his hands. You know, Siphon Soul was what came out of Nexus Champ Sarad again. There's no way to play around that. If you were keeping track as MoleGel, you might have suspected that the spell being held onto was some form of removal based on the fact that Hotform wasn't playing a lot of minions in the past few turns, but Siphon Soul is actually just kind of the worst case scenario there for him.
Yeah, Hotform turning up the heat. Instead of trading into the Snow Chugger, goes for face for a ton of damage. Gets MoleGel all the way down to 15 already. And now MoleGel has to play defensively with his aggro deck, which is never a position you want to be in.
No, and we talked about earlier, you said, you know, Arcane Intellect can sometimes make a difference in the grindy later game matches, but at this point, MoleGel, the quality of his cards is just below that of Hotform's on average in the deck, so it's going to be really tough for him to find a way back. He's already been through usually the 2 largest threats in Mech Mage, Archmage Antonitis and Dr. Boom, so there's not going to be anything that he draws off the top that's going to make a huge impact right away on the board.
This is kind of interesting looking at how both of these players have built these decks. Because Hotform's Tempo Mage is slower, I believe, than the traditional Tempo Mage. Running cards like Archmage Antonitis. And MoleGel's Mech Mage is less dense than the average Mech Mage, so it doesn't have that explosive ability that could have possibly punished Hotform's slower Tempo Mage deck. And it's interesting to see how these dynamics have made it for a game like this, where MoleGel's Mech Mage, while traditionally more aggressive, is actually just not really kind of living up to the aggression.
Absolutely. We see Antonitis come down. Once again, no cheap spells, but Hotform definitely threatens to draw into them. And we're just going to see a 5/7 Antonitis playing fair, running into minions. And, yeah, no Fireball shenanigans, well, most likely.
Well, unless he draws into a spell, but he's actually been through a lot of those cheap spells in his hand. We'll have to see what he's going to draw off the top. It is a Water Elemental, so he's not going to be able to make those Fireballs, and his Archmage Antonitis is in danger of dying, but it still seems like his creatures overall are going to be higher power level than MoleGel's. But, I mean, with not drawing a spell off the top, Hotform might have given up a little bit more than he would have expected against MoleGel's deck.
Right, with no spells coming out of Hotform's deck off the top, we're going to have a nice clean minion fight, except actually Hotform's just going to go face. And sees the win condition, sees the series closing in his sights, and he just decides he's going to force MoleGel to have the answers. And drawing Piloted Shredder is one of those cards you love to see most of the time. This is not really the time you want to be seeing Piloted Shredder. So I believe MoleGel is actually running Flame Strike in here too, so that could have been helpful. Yeah,
I was going to say, that could have been a little risky by Hotform because Flame Strike is a card in MoleGel's deck, so he could have been very punished. That could have gave MoleGel initiative in this matchup, so maybe a bit risky.
Gotta wonder if you were Hotform there when you saw the Shredder trade into the Antinitus and bump it down to 4 health. If just for a second, like Hotform's like chest tighten up, he's like, no, don't Flame Strike me. I don't want any. But no, he's not gonna get Flame Struck. And ooh, yeah, it's time to go face. Yeah, Frostbolt comes out, and with these missiles,
This could be game.
Yep.
Not
One more head to hit face, but this is still the writing's on the wall here. MoleGel would have to draw Alexstrasza and Flame Strike and play them both on the same turn. Looks like Hotform is going to go ahead and take the series. He is going to advance, beating MoleGel 3-1, and he's going to the semifinals now. No, yeah, he gets to win one more matchup.
He's going to the decider match for his group, and there's the handshake. Big congratulations to Hotform, but also to MoleGel. Of course, that was his elimination match. There you go, Hotform. Giving a little fist bump to the crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. Very dominant performance, 3-1. Really understood his matchups, the mulligans, how to play. And yeah, the decks that he was so confident in definitely paying off in this matchup.
Yeah, great run for MoleGel. Don't want to take anything away from him and his travel so far to the Americas Championship. Put up a couple of great fights and just unfortunately got edged out, but still, great showing for him and a great introduction to the rest of the Americas
Absolutely.
region.
He's 14 years old. You get to visit another continent, play Hearthstone. It's a great weekend.
Yeah, he's going to be a player to watch moving forward, maybe into next year's World Championship to be a contender once again for the Latin American region.
He's already pretty old. He might just age out of the scene at 14. You know, it happens, obviously, but I think he's got a little bit more time to develop.
Just retire.
Just retire at the top of his game.
Made it to the Americas Championship, and there you go. Crowd giving MoleGel some love. And great to see stories like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and once again, a big shout out to the sponsors that make this event possible. The Amazon App Store, as well as Totino's. And with that, we are going to have to go to a quick break before we jump into the next decider match. But while we go, we have an interview with Purple, who's going to be in our upcoming match.